Hey there guys, it's your good pal Wiggly, and welcome to the bonus video for Let's Play Super Metroid. This time around, I don't have anything like a hard mode or amiibo content or a secret gallery to show you guys. As far as the main game goes, as it was intended to play, I showed off just about everything that there is to show. There are still like one or two things that I want to show about the base game, but for the most part, there isn't that much left to talk about the Super Nintendo game itself as is. Now, does that mean that there is very little to show? Absolutely not. I fell deep into the rabbit hole researching on this one, so much so that I kind of want to go back and remake my first two bonus videos with all the new resources that I found. There is an absurd amount of things related to Super Metroid that I found, and I'm not even showing you all of it. These are just the things that I found interesting enough to include, but there's a lot more out there still. We're going to get into some pretty esoteric things, and nobody's going to care about it except for me and maybe a handful of a couple super diehard Metroid enthusiasts. But I encourage you that if you're interested in this sort of thing, go and do some research yourself as well. I will leave some links in the description of some cool things to check out, including a lot of the stuff that I use to find my information. And without any further ado, I'm not going to waste your time any longer. Let's go ahead and get started. Before anything, I want to give huge shout outs to my most prominent sources. Big thank you to the Metroid Fandom Wiki, Metroid Database, the Cutting Room Floor, and VGM Studios Metroid Museum for chronicling all of this stuff. There are links to all of these in the description for you to check out for yourself, and I cannot stress enough how important it is that this is all being preserved. Thank you guys. The first thing that I want to talk about is that during the escape sequence in the finale video, you may have noticed that I did an optional thing where you can go down to the lower section of Criteria and free the Shine Spark Bird and the Wall Jump Monkeys from the exploding Zebus, and there's actually a point to that, because if you do that, during the scene where Zebus explodes, you can see a little purple something in the sky fly off to the right. If you choose not to do that, those animals don't make it out of Zebus. You can tell because that little purple thing isn't there in the ending. Of course, I already talked about the moonwalk technique, which you can turn on in the file select menu, which allows Samus to back up slowly while charging her charge beam, but there are actually a few secret techniques that I didn't know about at all. First up, if you hold a charge shot and then duck into Morph Ball form without letting the charge shot go, Samus will lay 5 bombs at the same time around her, and they'll actually bounce down slopes with a gravity effect, and they will all do the same amount of damage as one bomb would. If you turn off all other beams except for the charge beam and the ice beam, and then select a power bomb and do the exact same thing that we just did, Samus will have these little ice particles float around her as a shield and then eventually scatter off in all directions. Similarly, if you have only the wave beam and the charge beam equipped, these little purple particles will fly around her in a wide radius before eventually flying off. I can only get this one to work in the air though. Same thing with the spacer beam, these little yellow particles will float around her and then shoot straight upward. And same thing with the plasma beam, these green particles will pulse around her once and then fly off in all directions. And last, but most certainly not least, is the Crystal Flash technique. If you have completely empty reserve tanks or no reserve tanks at all, and your total health is under 50 points, you can select the power bomb, go into Morph Ball form, hold L, R, down, and fire, and Samus will have this glow of light all around her, and it will convert 11 power bombs, 10 missiles, and 10 super missiles to restore the entirety of your health. That's really great. Probably the most minor thing that I noticed while re-recording the game to get more footage for this episode is that when you wall jump off of certain things, they do this like shaking animation, such as the dead spore spawn, and I actually noticed this in the finale video when wall jumping up a shaft in Brinstar and accidentally wall jumping off of this headpiece. It shook and I was wondering why, but now I know. There are two things during the Let's Play that I mentioned, but I wasn't able to show off, and I thought that those would be a good fit for this video as well. The first of which being that if you do enough damage to Ridley during the opening Ceres segment without taking too much damage, he'll drop the baby before deciding to just leave without bringing you down to critical health. I also mentioned that with the right timing, it's possible to kill Dragon by using the grapple beam on the broken turrets, and here is what that looks like. And with that, I've shown off everything that there is to do in the base game of Super Metroid. More accurately, I've shown off everything that you're intended to do in the base game of Super Metroid. Are you guys ready to dive into the world of glitches and sequence breaking? I've sort of developed the opinion that Super Metroid is at its worst when you don't know what you're doing and it's your first time through. When you replay this game with all the skill and knowledge that you've accumulated on your first run, the game gets so much more fun. You feel awesome, and here's an example of that. It is possible to get the wave beam without having the grapple beam by just doing a wall jump over the wall and grabbing it early. And with a slightly trickier wall jump, you can get into Kraid's lair without having the high jump boots, meaning that you can get the Varia suit before stepping foot in Norfair at all, which is how it should have been in my opinion. I do this every time now. And now for the really cool stuff. With enough practice and pixel-perfect timing, it's possible to shoot a super missile at a green gate in just the right way that the explosion will open it from the opposite side. This one let me get the grapple beam without having any power bombs. Sadly, it only works when the switch is facing left, though. There's a technique called Mock Ball, where if you jump through an open door and then roll in a morph ball the second you hit the ground, Samus will roll at her sprinting speed, allowing you to roll under speed booster gates that you shouldn't be able to. This one allowed me to get the ice beam without having to speed booster. But there's a more interesting thing that we can do with the Mock Ball. Very early on in the game, if you do a Mock Ball in this Brinstar room, you can get a reserve tank and 2 missile expansions early. But more importantly, you can get a super missile expansion without having to fight Spore Spawn, which means that you actually don't have to fight Spore Spawn at all, because he only guards the super missile, so now you can just move on with the rest of the game without ever fighting him. But Wiggly, you say, I want to 100% the game and not fight Spore Spawn, but there's a super missile block that won't let me get the expansion he's guarding. Well, friend, do I have a solution for you? After using the Mock Ball to get the super missiles early, you want to continue on to the lower Brinstar red soil area, where you can do this very, very difficult and strictly timed wall jump to get up to where the power bombs are early. After fighting off a few enemies that are way too strong because you don't have the Varia suit yet, you can get 2 power bombs early, giving you a total of 10. On your way back to where you were before, you'll have to use a super missile to clip through this gate because we don't have the wave beam yet. After that, you'll have to find yourself 1 more power bomb expansion because we need to have at least 11 power bombs, and don't waste any power bombs because as far as my knowledge goes, no enemies around here will drop any. I did a bomb jump to get up to this room to get mine. Then you'll have to travel all the way to the left side of Brinstar and use your power bombs to get this super missile expansion so that you have at least 10. Then go back to where the super missile block was and use the enemies there to restock your ammunition, and then get yourself down to below 50 health, make sure your reserve tank is empty. And then you'll want to hop into the hole and do a crystal flash right next to the super missile block, which will get Samus stuck so that she can shoot it, and then realize that the crystal flash used up all of your super missiles, and then cry. Or you can forgo all that and just jump from this specific tile and shoot a super missile and it'll just break the block anyway for some reason. That works too. The next exploit I want to show off is super cool. If you're underwater or lava and then pause the game and start to hold the jump button just before the screen fades to black, then turn off the gravity suit and unpause the game while holding the jump button again, the game will combine Samus's 2 different underwater physics for this jump, giving you a net gain to jump height, allowing you to do things like get into Ridley's lair before fighting Dragon and getting the space jump. Speaking of Ridley's lair, if you haven't fought the Golden Torizo boss and then hold A, B, X, and Y while going into the boss room, you'll notice that Samus's stats will change, but as soon as you let go of the fire button, the game will crash. You can get around this though by going into Morph Ball form when you enter the room. This way you won't have a beam charged up. Now you'll have 700 energy, 100 missiles, 20 super missiles, 20 power bombs, and every item in the game except for the screw attack, which is in the next room anyway. The reason why the game crashes when you hit the fire button is because this trick also turns on all 5 beams, which is something that you can't normally do. So when you fire this combination, the game has no idea what to do and it just stops. This actually relates to the next trick that I want to talk about, the murder beam. After you have all 5 beams, make sure that you have all of them turned on except for the plasma beam. Then with your cursor hovering over space jump, press left and A at the same time. This will turn on the plasma beam without turning off the spacer beam, but if you fire this shot uncharged, then the game will crash every time. Instead, charge your beam before pausing the game and doing this. Now you can fire the shot charged and the game won't crash, but it looks like it doesn't do anything. What's actually happening here is that Samus is firing a beam that doesn't have a sprite, doesn't move, and doesn't destroy itself when it makes contact with something. So what you're actually doing is marking a tile that will do constant damage to any enemy that touches that tile. This is really useful in the Mother Brain fight. If you place it in the right spot, every single time she steps forward, she'll take damage and step back, and you can still use your missiles and super missiles while this beam is active. Hilariously, for some reason, Ridley's tail will pick up this shot, making his tail look like it's exploding and doing constant damage to him throughout the fight. This is really useful. This last glitch is probably my favorite one in the game. If you let yourself get hit by Dragon's sticky web things, it'll slow Samus down, and if you do it right, you can store up a Shine Spark in this room. If you kill Dragon with a Shine Spark, Samus' suit will continue to glow blue, leaving her in a constant Shine Spark state while you're able to control the game normally. Unfortunately though, if you ever press the run button, or take any damage, you'll lose this suit. Of course I didn't talk about every glitch and sequence break in this game because there are just an absolute ton of them, but if you're interested in this sort of thing, I really recommend you go do your own research because there's a lot more that I didn't talk about. To get you started, I left a link in the description to the Metroid fandom wiki about something called the Space-Time Beam. I really recommend you read this because it's cool as hell. And now let's talk about some cut and unused content, starting with this title screen that says 4 Metroid. The 4 is probably just an error, and this whole title screen is probably just a placeholder while they were developing the game, but it's still really interesting to look at. I know some people have a fascination with built-in piracy warnings because they're just so weird and off-putting, so here's the piracy warning for Super Metroid. There's also an unused game over menu in the code that asks you whether you want to end or continue. The most interesting thing about this to me is that the font at the top for the numbers looks completely different, and I honestly like this font more than the one that was actually used. There are 2 sprite palettes in the game's code that weren't used anywhere. The first one gives Brinstar a much darker looking appearance, and the other one makes Criteria bright red. This was probably going to be used during the ending escape sequence. There's a graphic that says long, which almost definitely means that the long beam was going to be a separate power-up instead of being in Samus's default moveset. I'm glad this was changed. There's also this sprite set of what looks like a mouth that loads in along with Mother Brain that looks very similar to her eye. I'm glad they didn't use this. The Shack Tool enemy has an unused attack which shoots steam. There are 3 unused enemies in the game, the first of which being a ball-looking thing called a Bang, which looks a lot like a Phazoid from the Prime series. The second enemy is called a Reflect, and it was supposed to be used for puzzles where you would shoot it and it would bounce your shot off in a different direction. The last unused enemy is called a Stoke, and look at him, he's a little baby Crocomire. How could you not love this? I couldn't find any footage of a Bang or Reflect working in-game, just this image, but a YouTube user by the name of Gameboy Gamer has uploaded footage of a Stoke. Thank you very much for uploading that. Make sure you go check out that video in the description. The last thing I want to talk about in this segment is this unused room. The bottom portion of this room is just the room before the Golden Chorizo boss room, but the top portion looks completely different. It doesn't have the acid that you need to drain with the Golden Chozo statue. It's likely that this was the original design of the room and they thought of the acid idea later, but the most interesting thing about this is that the hand-drawn developer map of Zebes actually uses this room's layout instead of the one that was used in the final game. And now it's time to move on to art, starting with one of my favorite topics, box art. This is the North American region box art for the Super Nintendo, featuring Samus shooting a red Ridley right in front of the bottom portion of Kraid, if you can even see Kraid behind the text and everything. For some reason, in all Western regions, Ridley was portrayed as red. I don't know why that is. Just another weird localization thing. I guess anything's better than this. Incidentally, this depiction of Ridley may have inspired the red alternate costume for Ridley in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. The PAL region box art looks pretty much the exact same, it's just a little more zoomed out so you can see some more of the image, but their version came with a 72-page strategy guide as well, and they also had this completely red box version labeled the Golden Hits Collection, Nintendo Classics. The Japanese box art, on the other hand, while using the same render of Samus, looks way cooler than the Western box art. Not only does Ridley have the correct coloring, but I really like the position that he's in. You can actually see that that's supposed to be Kraid in the image. You can see a little space pirate in the shadows back there, some key hunters. I love this box art. Normally, those would probably be the only regions that I would discuss because those are like the three major gaming regions, but the German box art uses the exact same art as the North American release, but they have an entirely different strategy guide from the PAL release that uses a mirrored version of the Japanese box art for whatever reason. In North American regions, there was a bundle called the Super Metroid Control Bundle that contained both the game and a Super Nintendo, and the lucky UK folks got a double pack that gave them both Super Metroid and The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. That is an insane deal. Of course, your options for playing the game aren't strictly limited to the Super Nintendo and Super Famicom, because the game was re-released digitally multiple times, such as the Wii Virtual Console, which is unfortunately no longer active as of the recording of this video, but it is currently available on the Wii U Virtual Console, the Virtual Console for the new 3DS family of systems that won't work on the old 3DS, old 2DS, etc. It is available on the Super Nintendo Classic, which is how I played it for the Let's Play, and it is part of the Nintendo Switch Online service. Now I'd like to transition to talking about some of those guides that were bundled in with the game, but we're off to kind of a bad start with the PAL region's Super Metroid Player's Guide, because the only scan I can find of this thing anywhere is this admittedly pretty cool map drawing. Even though it's not particularly helpful for actually playing the game, it's still really neat to look at. But the reason why I can't find any scans of this thing is because every time I search for it, no matter what wording I use, the North American Super Metroid Nintendo Player's Guide comes up instead. Once again, of course, we have Kraid and a red Ridley front and center on the cover, but also a key hunter. I'm not sure why those are always so prominently featured for the cover arts for Super Metroid stuff. They're just kind of a normal enemy. I have no idea why they're always so right there in your face. But something I find really funny about this cover is the fact that on the very next page on the inside cover, you can see that they actually just slapped a logo over Samus doing a screw attack, and it's the same image. This guide is honestly really comprehensive, with super well put together maps, clearly written instructions on what you should do, and also some really nice art to go along with it, my favorite being this picture of Samus decking the hell out of a Gamer in the Meridia Area A page. But the most interesting thing to me is the fact that they have these enemy data sections with way more info than you're ever going to need about these enemies, like their HP numbers, as if that is helpful to anybody. Like, I think this is really cool. But the most powerful tip in this whole book is the fact that you can sign up for a year in the Nintendo Power Super Power Club, and you'll score a Nintendo Power magazine every month. It's the #1 gaming magazine in the world because it's packed solid with tips, codes, full-color maps, and reviews of the hottest games. We're talking more game action than any magazine you've ever seen. Plus, just try to name any other mag that gives you free system cleaning, $48 worth of game pack coupons, cool trading cards. If you want to go check out the entire 84-page guide for yourself, I left a link in the description where you can find it on archive.org. And I really recommend that you do read it because, after all, the Super Metroid Player's Guide is an arsenal of hot information for gamers. The guide that was bundled in with the German release doesn't just have a mirrored image of the Japanese box art on the front, but it also has this whole map that allows us to interestingly see the entirety of the wrecked ship from the outside, which is really cool. But it also has completely different art from the North American one, including this one for the Ceres segment with a little bit of background for Metroids 1 and 2. Here's the page for Criteria. Brinstar with her fighting Kraid, I really like this image. Norfair, I like this image even more. You can see my favorite little fire seahorse enemy down there. The wrecked ship featuring Botwoon and a goofy looking Avir, which is kind of weird considering they appear in Meridia and not the wrecked ship, but whatever. The actual Meridia page. One for Torian. And a secret passages section. The Japanese Nintendo official guidebook for Super Metroid has some really cute chibi art sprinkled throughout it, but most interestingly, it has some direct interviews with the creators, a few of which I would like to share with you. In this interview, it's stated that Samus was originally going to be naked during her death animation, and a soundbite of sound designer Minako Hamano screaming was supposed to play, but they cut both of those out for being too sexual for Nintendo's standards. There are some storyboards for this game sprinkled throughout the guide too, my favorite one featuring the super long vertical shaft where the monkeys teach you how to wall jump and it sucks for kids that don't know how to do it very well. And it's funny because the storyboard calls that room Naraku, which can either translate to abyss or more aptly, hell. All of the developers that were interviewed were asked to divulge a secret of Samus that only they knew. Metroid series co-creator Yoshio Sakamoto replied with, "I know where Samus's beauty mark is," which is interesting because this could be related to the fact that in Metroid Other M and onward, Samus was given a mole underneath the left side of her lip. The other interesting response to this question is programmer Yasuhiko Fuji's response, where he says, "Samus has no secrets, the enemies have a few secrets," which is most likely referring to the fact that the weird pattern that the Avir enemies fly around in right before the Dragon fight spell out the English letters for the words Keiko, love. Several years later, in 2007, Fuji revealed that Keiko was the name of a girl that he was dating at the time, and he snuck in this secret message while all of the other developers were sleeping. We're not quite done with Super Metroid media in the form of a booklet yet, that was a weird sentence to say, because Super Metroid was featured on the cover of several magazines, such as the Super Play magazine, I love this artwork by the way, the Game Player's Sega Nintendo magazine, the Total magazine, the Australian Nintendo magazine system, and of course, issue 60 of Nintendo Power. Speaking of Nintendo Power, from issues 57 to 61 of the magazine, they ran a Super Metroid comic, which had really amazing artwork. In issue 58, the editor-in-chief, Gail Tilden, states that they were having trouble creating Samus's facial features for the comic based on the in-game graphics, so they tried to go with something between Princess Leia and Ripley from the Alien series. Between those sources, I don't know where the purple hair came from, but you know, to each their own, man. By far the most interesting thing about this comic, though, is the fact that despite being very strictly not canon, this seems to be the very first instance of any piece of media ever stating Samus's home Earth colony, K2L, and also every single character in this comic, except for one, reappears in the Magazine Z Metroid manga, which is the canon backstory for Samus. If you put an arm cannon to my head and made me pick one link for you to click in the description, it is the scans for this. This is a very, very cool and interesting read. Please go check this out. Would you believe me if I told you that I had another Super Metroid comic to show you? Well, it's true, because here is the Shonen O Game Comics comic, Oh, Metroid, featuring really, really cute artwork for Samus. This is a series of short, comedic sketches related to Super Metroid, which is also in the description for you to check out as well, and here are a couple highlights of my favorites. According to these comics, Samus's favorite thing to do on a relaxing vacation is to roll into a morph ball in the middle of a grassy field. As soon as she got the X-ray visor, she accidentally saw the wall jump monkeys doing something. But by far, my favorite one is the one where she does a shine spark and bonks her head right into an asteroid, and the space pirates think that she's a shooting star and they wish upon her to be able to conquer the galaxy. There were some really neat game store displays around that time, one of my favorites being this shot where you can kind of see a weird, disproportionately small Ridley being shot by Samus, with such catchy phrases around her such as 24 megs of super playing power. She's a walking arsenal covered by armor and attacks with blinding speed. No wonder she's irresistible. There was also this poster of the Western box art that says Super Metroid, The Return of Mother Brain, which I've heard some people say was originally going to be the subtitle for Super Metroid, but the only source I can ever find of that being a thing is this poster, so I don't think it's true, but I mean, maybe. And here's a super cool cardboard standee for Super Metroid that says, "She's back." If you're like me and into super esoteric things like this, I'm going to really recommend that you check out VGM Studios' Metroid Museum, because they have a lot of pictures of this kind of stuff up there, and it's only growing more and more with time, so please go check out that link in the description as well. That is a super cool website. There was a Super Metroid Nintendo Switch skin that I'm absolutely going to have to purchase like right after I finish making this video because it looks amazing. I love the fact that it makes the dock look like the Super Nintendo cartridge. I love the fact that it uses both the Japanese and Western box arts, and a promotional image for it used a high quality render from Samus Returns, which a lot of people mistakenly took as a leak that Samus Returns was coming to the Switch anytime soon. I found some Super Metroid pins, like this one that says Nintendo exclusive, and this one that says free, double your product repair warranty. I had to find out where on earth this pin was from, so I took a shot and reached out to the creator of the Metroid Museum website on Facebook, and they reached out and found a collector who said that it was from a Nintendo World Class Service Center. I'll be honest and say that I had no clue what that was, so I did some digging and found out that Nintendo World Class Service Centers were places where you could take your broken consoles and get them diagnosed and fixed, and apparently double your product repair warranty for free. Wow! While we're on the topic of Super Metroid merchandise, Nintendo Power had some merchandise that you could buy, like this Metroid hat and this medallion, but most interestingly, there was a Magic Eye poster called a Stare EO poster. Haha, get it? Like stereogram? But there was also this limited edition Super Metroid print that you could get, which not only used stock Metroid 2 artwork, but also was signed by the Samus Aran herself, wow, and it also glowed in the dark, which is actually really cool, and since it's green and black, I really wish that this was Metroid 2 merch and not Super Metroid merch, but hey, can't win them all. This is still cool as hell. Speaking of cool as hell Super Metroid merch, there was this t-shirt that you could get, and while the t-shirt itself isn't anything spectacular, it came in a Super Nintendo cartridge-shaped case, and I love that. What's that? You want to see more Super Metroid shirts? Well, okay, there's this one, and this one, and this one, and a blue version of that one, and this cool Ridley one, and a Vaporwave one, and the best one. What else? A wallet, an eraser, a tweet from Nintendo of America in 2010 that said that they uploaded a video of 2 people attempting to speedrun Super Metroid on the Wii Nintendo channel. Okay, this is getting really ridiculous. I think this is a good spot to end off this video. I really hope you guys enjoyed it. This is by far the most work I've put into a video so far. And before I go, I have one more thing to show you guys.
Before Nintendo came out with Super Metroid, we wanted to make sure it was the most intense Metroid battle ever. So we thought we'd see how Killer here would fare against it. Ready, boy? That's 24 megs worth of weapons, worlds, and weirdos old Killer's up against. Nintendo's biggest game ever. But he's a big boy. He can handle it. Well, let's see how he did. Ship it! Super Metroid, only on the Super NES.